I just wanted to say thank you, Marcia and Phil, for publishing Jackson's book, which is a wonder. It's a book I keep right next to my chair, and I read it often, and I know it made him really happy. So anyway,
Closer to the mic, please.
okay,
Yeah, a little closer to the mic.
like this, okay, okay,
Yeah.
all right. It's hard for me to see the paper around the mic. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to begin with a poem called Disco Saturday Night. And it's in 3 parts. And here we go. Disco Saturday Night. One night in August, after a full 2 months of tropical heat, almost unnoticed in the glamour and glare, after a lifetime of swimming more or less alone, she glides into the beach and strikes sand and drags herself straight out of the water 30 yards and starts to dig. A crowd gathers. Women with their shoes held in their hands. Men in white shirts and leather. Someone has called the harbor police. Stand back, give her air, give her room. By now, she has made a shallow basin and has turned and started to lay. She has barely arrived in time. Wet and ripe, the white orbs pile over one another, each one deliberate, each one important, as the crowd murmurs and the cars slow down, and her eyes, glazed, seem not to see, not to understand, her urge so strong, so compelling. She defecates and begins pushing sand over the nest with her paddles, pushing, and then begins her trip back to the waves, half lifted and hurried along by the harbor police, who will dig up her eggs to incubate them. When she hits the first wave, she lifts a little, then keeps crawling and hits the second wave, suddenly lithe and free. And with a few strong thrusts, escapes the light, the noise, the task, the scent of dogs and rats, and disappears headlong into the sea. It was not the thing itself. It should not have been remarkable. 100 years in the past, nobody would have noticed or stopped to watch one female among thousands, one nest with its ping-pong balls faintly luminous. We would have been digging, shoveling the piles of unbored islands, continents into a bag to be eaten without guilt, seasoned with lime juice and salt, lips smacked and singing. It was inexhaustible. It was a universe. It was like a woman giving herself for the first time, every time. Like sex that comes and goes and comes again. It was a divine food. How could anyone have turned away from what was offered and what was so clearly good? The turtle swims alone out of the wide bay. Overhead the swells, greens and yellows filtered by clouds of kelp, shadows of gray whales, whole herds moving with one mind to the warm waters where they will give birth, females spurting single child whales, shimmying free in shoals of blood, turning and nuzzling them up to the air, hosed clouds of milk in the water nurturing the small ones so they bump and swim together, lumbering in the shallows, resting there. The turtle swims on, feeds and dives with her broad paddles pulling her. She does not think about her sons and daughters curled in their paper shells, the life throbbing in the jellied forms, the idea of turtle constant in them, the need to be cooled by the tide and warmed by the sun. She does not ask for anything, but leaves them there, impassive, trusting. Hours ago, she had already forgotten. Some of you might remember this event that made all the newspapers, and it's called In Phoebe's Car, and you might remember Phaeton was the young boy, and he was like the teenager wanting to drive his father's car, which turned out to be a chariot drawn by horses over the sun. And he was, as his father had warned him, he was not strong enough to hold the horses, and he ended up burning in a fiery ball. And but I love this quote from Ovid. Here Phaeton lies, in Phoebus' car he fared, and though he greatly failed, more greatly dared. So this was the based on the newspaper article. Remember that guy who strapped himself into a lawn chair, armed with a BB gun and a six-pack of Budweiser, and launched himself into the sky with 28 weather balloons like a small herd of lollipops wildly charging? When the oxygen thinned and ice began to form on him, and he had become a puzzling blip on the radar screen at LA Airport, diverting several large jet planes, he shot 8 balloons and sank through the smog and tangled in a power line. The fire department hauled him down, and the police department arrested him, and the reporters pushed toward him with their microphones to hear what he would say. When the astronauts stepped out on the surface of the moon, I was roaring down a bridge with my unhappy husband, through the empty streets, wanting to see the moment, headlong to his mother's house, where in closets piled with old clothing we once hid and stripped and arched longingly toward our children. I screamed for silence. I thought my husband was going to hit me. I wanted to hear the first words spoken on the moon. But I'm weary of disappointment. Let's talk about need. Starlings gathering in the trees outside, gripping the wires, short-circuiting the TV screens, iridescent as oil, greens darkly flashing purple, bristling bills and harsh, strong cries. Okay. Okay. This is, it's quite an old poem, but I still like it. It's called Like Candles. Thinking on this rainy day of old lovers, like candles blown out on a cake. I hate how life shrinks the huge fish I caught and photographed, which 10 years later looks like a small perch. And the house I lived in once with its vaulted rooms, which turns out to be quite ordinary. Even the ranch, which was my universe, caught by a backward glance from the new highway at 70 miles per hour as I speed toward my death, is just a dimple in the hills, tilted and spinning away into space. And the breasts, the areolas I woke to touch, the fragrances, the silks and secrets, the bell voice breaking over me like morning light. The fried egg happy on its plate surfaces for this moment and slips away. I don't know why now my life is steady as a train on its track. I regret what I lost. Like a coin tossed into a river of cash, a dime I held and warmed in my fist. I traded that for this. Now, I had intended to time this, and of course haven't, so.
I think you're good.
I think, okay, yeah, all right. This is another kind of old one. It's a little on the formal side. It was written when I lived in Seattle, and I would. We had a dining room table that overlooked the yard and the house next door that had clapboard siding on it, and as the sun would change directions, the shadows on the clapboard would become wider or thinner. And the house one summer had been painted, and the house wasn't dry enough to have been painted. So the paint started bubbling on the clapboard, and having a fairly good imagination, I made it into this. That year, the whales. That year, the whales rose out of the green paint. I forgot to hate the things I used to hate. I left the wallpaper hanging in strips and let the cats go in and out while books piled up in drifts. That year, I let myself stay up late and drink, though the clock that rang at 6 was loudly cursed. That was the year the children's rooms began to reek of moldering oranges and chocolate. And I had yet to write 1,000 stupid lines about love, that impossible give and take, though I and a friend took time enough to understand the words we couldn't say. All that spring, the shadows made a changing shape on the neighbors' clapboard walls, like rows of ocean waves, where blisters from the summer sun began to swell with a cetacean grace and let their bellies roll. I watched out my window while the slow months wait. That year the whales rose out of the green paint, pressed like coal in my throat, until the whole year lit up and dove and shrank itself to a minute. So this is new, and it's called McGowan Lake, summer 2017. In the middle of one of my family's wild conversations, I've walked over here to gaze at the geese. The lake, too, reflects, as 4 of them dip their long necks toward pondweed, hyacinth, and ripples scroll across to the quiet side, the shady side, towards cedar stumps robed in moss. In my lifetime, some have swollen and softened into tiny islands where, at night, the water birds can rest. It's just after breakfast, as the talk unspools without me, roars of laughter and argument, the quieting when someone speaks about her work. All the new thinking, the confidence that their lives will go on, the joyful planting of orchards, the love of animals and of each other. Tom and Eric talk fishing for hours. It's almost, they grin, better than the fishing itself. Both are happily limping from a slide down a mountain bank to fish the pockets, the inaccessible stream with its fat rainbows caught and released. In one photo, Tom's square hand is clamped firmly around a trout. The hook has been tenderly removed. It is the moment just before the fish is lowered back into the stream. What does it promise us, this fish, stunned as if asleep, breathing water again, the quick flash, the amazed re-entering? Okay, I'll do one where I'm playing with language a little bit here. This is called To Break It, to Find It Again. Not always, but always. including death-arousing noise, jerk and robot, both the no and the yes. Oddly new, newly old, to find the flirt in us. Mm-hmm. If poodle can prance, can prong, if squirrel, if ocean's brilliant foam is thin enough to breathe, wise animal music pumped out in pups, kits, chicks, drips. If turtle hatchlings blunder, magnets for the salt sea. If we are lost, far from the breast, too far up, away far down, and then trees, giants, and also the tiny wild blooms. She opens her eyes. In her water, we see us. Vulvid creatures by the ocean that are the ocean. They taste of her. Tits and pips, mountainous crusts and secretions, birthing eyes of the divine. If we wash away, if we melt, if we are clumsy and hilarious, splayed feet we quack. If we are a parade of elephants, linked trunk to tail. If we are continents balanced on a ball. If we are clapping, sucking in our next first breath. Okay, this one's kind of fun to read. To the Lizard God. God of damnation, lizard God eaten alive each day by the cat, and your guts ground into the carpet, or flung, O God of abandonment, into a corner. God of stench, God of retribution, warm and soft in my paper napkin, tossed in the waste basket, carried out with crumbs and paint flakes, fruit skins and onion husks, nail parings and hair fished from drains. With crushed bugs and blooded, swatted, stinging things, O God that gives and takes away, forget me in your pain. Turn your face from me in your suffering. Close your eyes upon me in the furnace of midday as you begin to rot, or in the tepid rain. When ants deliver your flesh to their queen, when your acids leak into dirt, when your frail bones fall into calcium and enter the clear blood of plants, when you are sipped at last to the top of the tree, think of me, O infant. When the brown moth alights on you and you give thanks, O God of the one everlasting touch, O breath, remember me. Yeah. So, do I have time for a couple more short ones? Yeah. Are you sure? Okay. Crickets. This is actually the last poem in the book. Many of you probably had the same experience I did, where about this time of year, when you were a little kid, you had to go to bed even though it was still light. And then one day there would be crickets, and you didn't hear them start, but somehow they were there. And where were they before, And but they're still there. And so I've been fond of them ever since. And this poem is called Crickets. They were travelers, but they always came back on a warm summer night, drenched in mathematics, singing like a unison of stars on the lake. There's a hut at the end of a field where I and the dogs sometimes walk. 2 shirts on a line, no electric light. It is shaded by the widest, tallest tree, older than our street. I miss my father late at night and think of my old companions, how everything they taught was true and bright, and of how we are still on earth together, still wide awake. And I'll end with this one. I think probably my favorite poem in the book is the last one, his Ars Poetica of Jackson's. And this doesn't pretend to be anything like that, but it does speak of why we create and what it does for us. And it's called Night Windows, and it's the same windows that we're watching the whales in the paint before. And also, it refers to the Hopper painting of the same name. The neighbors are making love again. Their sighed, resonant cries, drawn out unexpectedly, honestly, into a summer night that was longing for them, waiting to be filled. My cats stir and shift on their pillows. And if, at an exhibition, I am struck dumb standing in front of Hopper's night windows, it is not by the half-dressed woman or the breeze that flies out of the painting and lifts my hair, but by the love that renders them and strips them bare. My own loves and failures, of which even now it is difficult to speak, have been forgiven here. I can go on. I am not unlike the happy man next door. I can hear him whistling in the shower.